Chapter 7. Free trade? Just how free is free trade? When discussing free trade, one is referring to human beings making trades. So the trading can be no freer than are the individuals making the trades. Individuals do not experience absolute freedom. Being limited, incomplete, and imperfect, human beings experience freedom as freedom to choose between available choices. Also, trades are firmly grounded in reality, as one's freedom to make a trade is limited by what one possesses to offer in trade. Most have no problem recognizing that they are not free to trade skyscrapers simply because they are not likely to own any. When the U.S. Constitution was submitted to the states for ratification, it received a chilly reception. It was specific in enumerating the rights that individuals were to surrender to the new republic, but offered little detail regarding the rights reserved to the people. To clarify this, the Ten Commandments were added that are called the Bill of Rights. One's first reaction to the Ten Commandments could resemble the state's chilly reception to the new Constitution. The first 4 commandments establish the rights of religious authority over individuals. Then 6 commandments establish the rights of government authority over individuals. Moses did not lobby for any individual's Bill of Rights amendments to the Ten Commandments. People who express their love of the U.S. Constitution are usually referring to the Bill of Rights contained in its first 10 amendments. The U.S. Constitution proper sets forth the mechanics of how government authority is to be allowed to restrict the freedom of individuals. Perhaps the popular view is correct. The Bill of Rights is more important than the mechanics of how these rights are restricted. If only the Ten Commandments were also amended with a Bill of Rights setting forth individual rights. Does that seem like too much to expect? Then how about just one right of the individual? The right of ownership. Ownership is the primary right on which all others depend. It is the right of every human being to own whatever one can contract to acquire, except another human being. This is not even an exception. It is axiomatic, as the owning of another human being would negate that human being's right to ownership, and in turn negate the entire concept. A sufficient understanding of the right of ownership leaves one both a liberal and a conservative. A liberal, by recognizing one's ownership right to oneself and one's freedom to take any available action that does not abridge the ownership right of others. A conservative, by recognizing that only the owner has the right to act regarding what one owns, and that no one has a right to any action regarding what one does not own. The golden rule is best stated negatively to preserve the right of ownership. Refrain from doing unto others what you would not have them do unto you. Thus, one refrains from abridging the ownership right of others. No human being has an ethical obligation to do more. At this level of merely refraining from abridging the ownership rights of others, it is possible to pursue entirely selfish goals, ignoring entirely the condition of others. The result can be perfectly ethical behavior that still obliquely improves the condition of others simply by promoting contracts that are beneficial to all parties concerned. However, if properly understood, one finds a positive interpretation of the golden rule to be even more rewarding. As Jesus put it, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But one must recognize that this positive interpretation can be debased to trespass on the ownership rights of others. One can refrain from doing unto others what one hopes they would refrain from doing unto you. That involves only the individual and does not involve the ownership rights of others. But doing unto others, even as you would have them do unto you, can be a breach of the ownership right of others to do as they please with themselves and what they own. Regardless of one's good intentions, one has no right to do unto others what they do not wish done unto them. Until the right of ownership is recognized, the negative statement of the golden rule is expedient. Refrain from doing unto others what you would not have them do unto you. The Consciologist finds that expanding one's awareness of consciousness is synonymous with actively supporting individual ownership rights. Doing unto others is a privilege that cannot be undertaken without permission of each individual owner. Ownership concerns who owns what. Economics concerns trading that ownership. Ethics concerns the self-discipline of limiting oneself to trading only what one owns. Ethical behavior is at the foundation of trading because in order to be eligible to make a trade, one must own something to trade. Free trade describes an economic system. The dictionary definition of economize does not go far enough. It defines economize to spend with care and prudence, but leaves unanswered the question of who is spending and who owns what is being spent. The economic system of free trade completes the definition of economize. Owners spending what they own with care and prudence. As was pointed out in an earlier chapter, only when the owner is spending what the owner owns will the spending be with maximum care and prudence. No other economic system can rival the degree of economizing that results when only owners spend only what they own. Therefore, the economic system of free trade produces the greatest economizing of material goods and services and maximizes the benefits to the owners. Under the economic system of free trade, every individual is an owner, and every individual benefits to the maximum possible. If something clouds one's title to ownership, then one's ability to trade ownership of that good is limited to that degree. If one owns land that is subject to annual government taxation, one's ability to trade that asset is limited by this flaw in the title. To a very real degree, the actual owner of the land is the government that owns the right to collect annual taxes on it. Can land be an object of really free trade? Not really, as long as it is encumbered by an obligation to pay the government potentially unlimited annual taxes on it. Most trades are subject to sales taxes, and many endure multiple taxation through excise taxes, tariffs, income taxes of corporations and then of the individuals who own stock in the corporations, estate taxes, and so forth. Then many are multiplied by the different taxing authorities of city, county, special taxing districts, state, and federal. Obviously, the government is a somewhat silent partner in every trade. The apparent owner cannot participate in free trade simply because the apparent owner does not own the property free and clear. We are taught by the searchers after authority that we should ignore these impediments to trade and ownership. They teach us that there is nothing so sure as debt and taxes. In fact, only so long as human beings remain ignorant of the scam perpetrated by these searchers after authority will the fraud of taxation endure. Is government the sole impediment to truly free trade? We have discussed at some length the three groups in society that are championed by the searchers after authority. These three groups are governments, religions, and gangs. Each of these three groups impacts individuals and free trade negatively. But the focus of this overall discussion is not a negative one. There is a fourth group in society whose influence is positive. The fourth group involves those individuals who are involved in the free trading of goods and services. This is the business group. This group is championed by the searcher after what is. For the most part, governments function at a physical or material level and do not concern themselves with the mental world. They are firmly planted in the material universe. The same can be said of gangs. Religions claim little concern for the material, but choose to focus on things mental and a third invention of their own, a spiritual or mystical world. Previous chapters of this book have tried to reclaim for the mental realm certain valid phenomena that religions have sought to adopt into their unknowable world of mysticism. The rest of their mystical universe appears to be a convenient mechanism for supporting the search after authority. Let us reclaim for business and free trade those positive attributes that religion has attempted to seize as their own. Ethics concerns the self-discipline of limiting oneself to trading only what one owns. This requires no authority to support its validity. This virtue is simply a corollary of ownership, as it involves the ethics of trading. The significance of those who do not choose to exercise self-discipline to limit their trades to what they own amounts to a mild annoyance to the world of business. They operate as individuals and in gangs, but represent a small blip in the total number of trades that occur. Individually, they can be characterized as shoplifters and con artists. Shoplifters are a nuisance and do add a tiny percentage to the cost of goods for which others enter into contracts to trade. Con artists prey on the ignorant, the infirm, and those weakened by age, those who are not as likely to exercise due diligence and the buyer beware attitude that are always conditions for free trading. These losses, though minimal in the overall scheme of things, can be devastating to the duped individuals. Even gangs operating in this manner are largely insignificant until the gangs are able to obtain the official approval and legal permission that can only be granted in today's society by government. Such arrangements go by the name of monopoly. In countries and times where religions hold dominance over political governments, they too can grant monopolies. The dictionary definition of monopoly is simply the sole right to trade in certain commodities. Of course, this definition is inadequate because it fails to confront the real issue. Traditionally, monopolies were granted by monarchs to those that the monarchy chose to reward with special privilege. The power of the monarchy prohibited others from engaging in free trade in the commodity for which the monopoly was granted. The dictionary definition fails to include that the sole right to trade in certain commodities is backed by the power of the government. A monopoly cannot exist without the enforcement of the government to prohibit free trade in that commodity. Obviously, monopolies have a disastrous effect on free trade since they abolish or outlaw it. Theoretically, a monopoly could exist and trade at prices equal to those who are engaging in free trade. But this does not happen in reality. Because what would be the point of achieving a privilege if one chose not to exercise the privilege? In practice, all monopolies trade at prices above the prices that would prevail in an atmosphere of free trading. In practice, monopolies victimize individuals to the extent that the monopolized commodity is required by the individual. That individual cannot avoid being hurt by the monopoly. Such government-granted privileges are quite simply licenses to steal. If governments, religions, and gangs are basically negative, the individual human beings participating in each may still be divided into those who are searchers after authority and those who are searchers after what is. The fact that these individuals are involved in enterprises that ultimately have a negative influence on humanity's awareness of consciousness in no wise means that these individuals can be categorized as sharing this negative influence. The exceptional individual may well be swimming upstream, as it were, and transmuting negative influences into positive ones. Both searchers after authority and searchers after what is may be involved in any of these fields. It is still up to the observer to separate the individual's action from the actions of the group within which that individual functions. Different human beings involved in business are in business for different reasons and participate under different rules. Both searchers after authority and searchers after what is are where you find them, whether in business, government, religion, or a gang. However, business is the proper environment in which to expect to find the searcher after what is. Since the searcher after what is represents the division of humanity, spearheading the awareness of consciousness, identifying searchers after authority who are interloping within the business group is a primary objective. The searcher after authority operating in business may be either an entrepreneur or an employee of the entrepreneur. Each has different objectives and needs to be considered separately. In the work of Burton W. Folsom, Jr., titled The Myth of the Robber Barons, he divides entrepreneurs into political entrepreneurs and market entrepreneurs. Political entrepreneurs, in quotes, political entrepreneurs seek profits by working with the government to get subsidies, grants, and special privileges. They seek success through political pull. In contrast, market entrepreneurs seek success by producing increasingly improved values, products, and services at increasingly lower costs. End quote. The secret to success in business is to be able to narrow the gap between the cost of what the customer wants and the price the customer has to pay for it. The only honest way to achieve this is by becoming the best at producing the good or service offered. There are also dishonest ways. Gangs can reduce their cost to nearly nothing by selling goods they do not own. And apparently legitimate businesses can narrow this gap by currying favor with the government. So we meet again. Political entrepreneurs are searchers after authority. Market entrepreneurs are searchers after what is. The history of this robber baron era has been used as an excuse for government to curb these excesses of big business. Folsom separates the leading industrialists of this robber baron era into the industries of shipbuilding, railroads, steel, and oil. In each industry, these excesses of big business are abundantly clear. But look a bit closer. The scandals and swindles and shoddy goods that result in the label of robber baron attach to the political entrepreneurs who were intent on government favors instead of producing the best product at an ever-increasing value to the customer. Being the best in business makes one popular with customers, but often invokes the hatred of the businesses who come out second best. It is the also-ran businessmen who enlist the aid of government and who foster the corruption at all levels that give businessmen the appearance of robber barons. Take the building of the transcontinental railroads. Like anything that is undertaken for government subsidies, qualifying for the subsidy takes precedent over producing a product that consumers are willing to buy. By 1869, a transcontinental railroad was in place. 9 years after the Union Pacific Transcontinental Railroad was completed, James J. Hill bought an incomplete 10 miles of track that he would eventually parlay into the Great Northern Route across the continent. Soon after its completion, it was flourishing, but by 1893, the Union Pacific, the Northern Pacific, and the Santa Fe were in bankruptcy. Each had been built with government subsidies. The Great Northern was built without any government aid. The Great Northern was built to be a railroad. The others were built to qualify for government largesse. But how, you ask, can that make any difference? Well, for one thing, the Great Northern Route to the Pacific was 106 miles less than the others. Hill took pains to survey before laying track. The Great Northern had fewer steep grades to pull, fewer turns to negotiate, and superior rails and railroad ties to run on. Hill was aware that if the Great Northern could not compete successfully, he would not be able to recover his sizable investment. The impetus of those who built under government subsidies was not to build a superior railroad, but to qualify for subsidies. In the rush, track was laid over ice and snow and naturally had to be rebuilt in the spring. Government loans and land grants were awarded per mile of track laid. If they laid unnecessary track to enhance the scenic route, they enhanced their subsidy position but detracted from the efficient operation of the railroad. The government loans would build the railroad, but it was customers of the functioning railroad who would pay back the loans. But to those intent on government subsidies, paying back loans holds a decidedly inferior claim on their attentions. Much expense was incurred in the 5 years following the apparent completion in 1869, rebuilding and sometimes relocating the shoddily constructed line. Folsom declares that the Union Pacific and Central Pacific, even with 44 million acres of free land and over $61 million in cash loans, were almost bankrupt. Of course, the officers of the corporations had made millions in profits by forming other companies to supply the rails and railroad ties, and another company to provide the support for the workforce. It was these practices that aroused shouts of fraud from a trusting public that was left with the uncollectible debt. But remember that corruption and fraud, while they are possible wherever human beings are acting with their imperfect, limited, and incomplete knowledge, tend to flourish where government subsidies exist. The terms under which the government subsidies are offered are never nearly as well thought out as are the terms under which human beings are willing to risk their own capital. That corruption and fraud are drawn to government subsidies should not tarnish the image of business. It is government that attracts corruption and fraud. Thus, it is important to distinguish between political entrepreneurs and market entrepreneurs. James J. Hill and the Great Northern Railroad represent market entrepreneurship, as they accepted no government aid, yet they flourished. The railroads that were built, not to be railroads, but to claim government subsidies, floundered. Years later, James J. Hill pointed out that they were not only not built to be railroads, neither were they operated as railroads. Quote, "It has not been run as a railroad for years, but as a device for creating bonds to be sold." End quote. The entrepreneur may be a searcher after authority and operate as a political entrepreneur, or may be a searcher after what is, operating as a market entrepreneur. Also, the employees of each of these categories of entrepreneurs in turn may be either searchers after authority or searchers after what is. It is not difficult to understand that searchers after authority will be comfortable working for political entrepreneurs, or that searchers after what is will be comfortable working for market entrepreneurs. It is a bit difficult to understand how searchers after what is could work for political entrepreneurs, and it is most difficult to understand how it would be possible to find searchers after authority working as employees of market entrepreneurs. In reality, it is imperative that political entrepreneurships employ searchers after what is, because even though they operate in a privileged position, they nevertheless operate as businesses and must function to some degree as what at least appears to be an efficient business operation. It is the searchers after what is that permit the political entrepreneur to maintain a business that functions at all. This irony is usually of little concern to the searcher after what is, though it would appear that the searcher after what is could be out of place in such an environment. These searchers after what is are content because they are operating a business. To the extent that they rule, the business functions vigorously. It is the searchers after authority working within the market entrepreneurships that give cause for concern. The searchers after what is, employed by political entrepreneurs, can only help those entrepreneurships. The searchers after authority, employed by market entrepreneurs, can only harm those entrepreneurs. Since the market entrepreneurs represent the real home of the searcher after authority, the fact that they have been infiltrated by searchers after authority is a problem that must be confronted with some urgency. Mark Hamilton, in Cosmic Business Control, writes that, quote, "The white-collar hoax monster of activity that does not converge on getting the work done grows through fake power, most often disguised as supervisory activity. Supervising through management layering removes accountability and responsibility from where it belongs, from the person doing the job. Instead, the person doing the work becomes specialized, just doing what he is told. If he were accountable for his performance, on the other hand, he would drive his job forward better than anyone else by using integrated thinking. Instead, he remains specialized and powerless. All the power, fake power, goes to the supervising manager who does not do the work." End quote. The harm done to business is similar whether perpetrated by this white-collar hoax or by government searchers after authority. Each places unjustified power in the hands of searchers after authority. The government searcher after authority assumes power over possessions that they do not own. The business searcher after authority, by way of the white-collar hoax, assumes power that derives from work they do not perform. This leaves a worker powerless to justify one's own position in the scheme of things. The searcher after authority justifies the white-collar hoax on the grounds that the worker does not understand how different jobs meld into the finished product. The supervisory strata of business is said to be necessary to integrate their positions with the overall business objectives. This produces a stratification in business similar to a stratification in society. Whether a caste system, a union system, a feudal system, or an apartheid system, this artificial stratification of society is generally recognized as harmful. Certainly the Consciologist recognizes it as detrimental to expanding one's awareness of consciousness. Stratifications of society attempt to degrade human beings to the instinctual level of animals. That hurdle was crossed some 3,000 years ago and cannot be reassembled for a new assault. Every human being has passed that test and no longer functions by instinct. Every human being deserves to be treated as a human being who functions by self-conscious awareness and not by animal instinct. Does this mean that every human being acts in such a manner that would make one's humanity self-evident? Certainly not. Does this mean that every human being is trying to demonstrate one's humanity? Certainly not. Does this mean that there are no human beings who are pretending to be animals and are acting accordingly? Certainly not. Then why should one be expected to treat them like human beings when they don't know they are, and they may not want to be, and they may desperately wish not to be? The searcher after what is can only respond because they are human beings. They are self-conscious human beings and entitled to treatment as such. This stratification in business creates the artificial dichotomy of labor versus management. These should not be confused with the proper dichotomy of entrepreneurs and employees. Entrepreneurs and employees do not represent stratifications. Any employee who applies oneself and exercises the self-control that permits one to accumulate the economic resources can become an entrepreneur. Likewise, the entrepreneur who does not make the proper economic decisions may lose the business and revert to being an employee of another entrepreneur. But the artificial dichotomy between labor and management is a direct result of this white-collar hoax. Those who do the work must also develop the skills to recognize their contribution to the overall business objectives. Simply put, they must function in business at a self-conscious level and not at an instinctual level. If the workers fail to achieve this, it is often attributable to a white-collar hoax supervisor who has been able to convince upper management that this stratification is necessary. This white-collar hoax may extend up through any number of layers of management functions, up to and including the CEO. While it is important for the workers to achieve a degree of this wide-scope integration of thoughts, it becomes increasingly necessary as one ascends through the hierarchy of business. Each white-collar hoax business person that occupies one of these positions of increasing responsibility accounts for ever-increasing drains upon the profitability of that business. This occurs in two ways. First, the searcher after authority soul of the white-collar hoax business person is not taking responsibility for the wide-scope integrated thinking that is required to guide one's part of the business to make the proper changes to take advantage of the current market conditions. Business leaders, like individuals, are not privileged to experience totally free choices. Only free choices between the choices open to one's business and its capabilities. The trick is to exercise the diligence necessary to recognize and act upon these choices when they present themselves. This requires the mind of the searcher after what is. If an executive position in business is occupied by a searcher after authority, this white-collar hoax business person will be incapable of performing the wide-scope integration of business choices necessary to lead the business into maintaining its profitability during changing times and circumstances. The attention of this white-collar hoax business person will oscillate between positive and negative impulses. The negative impulses make sure that those under one's authority remain there and that their ideas for improving productivity do not extend outside of one's fiefdom. No one is wholly either a searcher after authority or a searcher after what is, but always some combination of the two. Even though one might give the appearance of being wholly given to a search after authority, there is always that slight tendency to the search after what is. It is often this slight tendency that enables the white-collar hoax business person to sustain the hoax. For though the searcher after authority would never choose to act accordingly, this searcher after authority is nevertheless able to recognize and communicate ideas of others that do help to maintain the competitive position of the business. Thus, these positive impulses that the white-collar hoax business person is able to contribute to higher executive decisions also contribute to preventing the hoax from being exposed. The hoax is that this white-collar hoax business person is personally contributing nothing to this process, but is merely acting as a filter to block most of the searcher after what is ideas that are being created by those under one's jurisdiction who are actually doing the work. The cry is to get out of the way and let business function, whether addressing the searcher after authority operating in government or in business. Wide-scope accounting requires a distant vision of the future, as well as a detailed inspection of the present. Those adept at the process are often referred to as hard-nosed businessmen and women. Perhaps only the hard-nosed can endure putting one's nose to the grindstone close enough and long enough to smell out the myriad of possibilities that must be understood to run a business successfully. No less than with chemical formulas, precise measurements and attention to details are required for businesses to function profitably. Business formulas cannot be practiced with the precision of chemical formulas because these business formulas include the actions of free-choosing individuals. Nevertheless, businesses do require precise formulations with the understanding from the outset that only a given percentage will be successful. The trick is to be able to predict the proper ratio of successes and apportioning prices accordingly. Politics is natural to the searcher after authority. If the validation of everything flows from the authority, then it is by ingratiating oneself with the authority that one realizes one's potential. Politics is the art of impressing the right people, people who are in authority. Note that in this scenario, the value of the individual is zero. Any characteristic that describes the individual is beside the point and entirely without significance. The sole purpose of the individual is to serve, to adore the authority. Apart from this one reason for existence, the individual is expendable. The highest virtue is self-sacrifice, and the lowest vice is a peculiar kind of pride that presumes to elevate the individual over the authority. Pride that continues to praise the authority continues to be esteemed. Ridding business of those who really do not believe in business must be a major goal. The searcher after authority, who operates within the business setting, will inevitably undermine the profitability of the business, even though one might see oneself as dedicated to the business. Politics is involved with impressing the government authorities, religious authorities, and gang authorities, but not business authorities. The business that is impressed by by company politics, is one suffering from a bad case of the white-collar hoax and searchers after authority. Market, business, entrepreneurs are impressed by what is. They value individuals who value themselves as worthy of judging what is for themselves, without need of currying the favor of others. It does not appear to be fair that free trade could be successfully transacted by those who do not believe in the concept. Fairness is a concept that has always occupied a central position in any utopian scheme from before Plato and all those who followed up through Marx and all those after him. But no utopian scheme acknowledges that human beings are limited, incomplete, and imperfect. No philosopher king is capable of determining fairness for all. To each according to his needs does not provide fairness for all. Fairness is not a moral term. Fairness is an economic term. Fairness flows from free trade of ownership through contracts freely entered into by owners who freely choose to trade what they own. Human beings are limited, incomplete, and imperfect. Unlimited, complete, perfection, ultimate truth, ultimate fairness, ultimate freedom are foreign concepts that are the fool's gold pandered by demagogues, charlatans, and the uninformed. Fairness among human beings is the fairness determined by each party to each contract. Each individual is the sovereign that determines one's own fairness by the terms of the contracts in which that individual chooses to participate. Free trade is the economic condition that permits the sovereign individual to contract with other individuals, thus permitting fairness to grow as individuals are able to increase their awareness of consciousness. When fairness is judged to be an aspect of morality, it includes a dark side known as revenge. The morality play decrees that revenge is justified when fairness is denied. Put fairness where it belongs, and the concept of revenge and all its evils simply evaporate. The only fairness human beings experience is a factor of economics and contracts involved in free trade. Where free trade exists and free individuals exist, contracts still exist that are not fair. If an individual chooses to become a party to such an unfair contract, the individual learns from the mistake and determines not to repeat it in subsequent contracts. Revenge, the morality play, may destroy lives, thereby pretending to even the scales of fairness. The economics of life contains no concept of revenge. Fairness always abounds among responsible human beings contracting through free trade. The remedy to unfairness is simply to refrain from future contracts with those whom one feels have treated them unfairly. We have attempted to show that human law and fairness are unrelated, but that fairness corresponds to natural law. But the word law means a rule by authority. This is understood to place a restriction upon human action and lead to acts that are against the will of the individual. That is demoralizing because it locates power outside of the individual. It is also false because, in fact, power resides in the individual, not in the authority. In our previous discussion of the deception of human laws, it was pointed out they are only valid when confirmed by the individual. When a law is adopted as one's own, it is no longer a human law, but one's personal value. The stop sign law was used as an example, whereby the conscious individual wills to obey the stop sign law, not because the authority says to do so, but because that individual understands its value and freely chooses to act accordingly in nearly every instance. There is a world of difference between one stopping at a stop sign because the human law dictates and because the individual affirms it. The human action is the same, but the difference is the difference between the searcher after authority and the searcher after what is. This sanction of the intent of the human law and the abandonment of the authority is very empowering to the individual. Real power comes from the individual and not from some outside authority. Think how empowering it would be to the individual if it were possible not only to transmute human law, as has been shown, but to transmute natural law as well. At first it appears to be impossible to treat natural law as if one's sanction of it determined one's observance of it. For human beings certainly cannot choose whether natural law applies to them. But this deserves a closer examination. The empowerment of the individual occurs when one takes personal responsibility for one's own actions. We have tried to demonstrate that the apparent power that human laws exert over individuals is actually deception. But it seems apparent that the power that natural laws exert over individuals is factual and inescapable. Maybe, but is inescapable desirable? As with the stop sign, the individual does not seek to escape its instruction, but only seeks to understand it. With understanding and personal confirmation comes voluntary compliance. Not compliance at the decree of an authority, but compliance of the individual and one's consciousness of what is. The empowerment of the individual that results from this expanded consciousness over human laws is awesome. But the awe of gaining individual power over actions related to human laws becomes insignificant in comparison to the empowerment of the individual gained through a similar power over natural laws. Respecting the ownership right of others contributes to gaining their respect for one's own right to ownership. This includes recognizing the boundaries that separate oneself from others, and recognizing that those boundaries extend to what one owns and what others own. The possessions of each are extensions of themselves. Similarly, when one refers to natural laws and the physical world, one's main focus is on the 100 plus chemical elements that make up the physical world. The natural laws that determine how these chemical elements interact function on the same principles as do individuals who respect the boundaries of others and their right to possess what they own. Chemical elements partake of free trade and combine themselves in innumerable combinations. Still, each maintains its own integrity and possessions. When referring to the possessions of chemical elements, one usually refers to them not as possessions, but as properties. That is, the properties owned by each chemical element describe what ways the element reacts to free trades or encounters with other elements. No matter how these combinations seem to alter the properties with which they are combined, in time they disentangle themselves with their original properties intact. As one expands one's awareness of consciousness, one's understanding of the properties of the chemical elements of this physical world transforms one from being an object of the events of the physical world into being a subject, creating those events. An ever-increasing number of free trades empowers one to greater mastery of one's awareness of consciousness. One is no longer an object that things happen to, but one becomes the subject creating the action.